This is Ben Llewellyn, and today I'm talking about Welsh rulers that I think you should know. 12 of them. Let's get started. There's a structure to this video which I need to explain to you so you know what's going on. For each of these 12 kings, I'll give you information on each of these, like really compressed, one feature about each of them, that what made them unique in their own flavor to Wales, what they contributed. But I'm not going to go into any great length. I just want to give you a flash image of what they were. If you want to learn more, I'll give you information down below. But there are 12 of these, so let's get started. Rhodri Mervyn. And the name Marvin does come from Welsh ultimately. Rhodri the Great became king in 844 in Gwynedd and reigned for a long time. We're not sure if he died in 873, 877 or 878. Rhodri the Great was the first king to unify most of Wales, and that's significant. He also circumnavigated the laws a bit because women were not so much included in terms of inheriting properties, but he used his mother's line and his wife Angharad to absorb Powys and Ceredigion into his realm, so he was very astute. Why a hero king? Well, he won more than one battle on Ynys Môn against the Vikings. Repeated attacks, he drove them out of his kingdom, where in Ireland and North England they had basically destroyed entire kingdoms. They did not succeed to do so in his lands. He was a tenacious fighter. Over and over again, he repelled the Vikings and the Mercians, which were the biggest kingdom at that time in England. His title was King of the Britons. That's significant because he was making a wider claim. He's also, we think, responsible for Canu Llywarchen, a collection of poems around which there was probably more text, but it's a tool of propaganda. It harks back to kind of a pseudo-romantic, patriotic period of the Kingdom of Powys, over which he was claiming inheritance. And so we think this may have been a rather astute form of socio-political propaganda to claim right to rule over Powys, showing that this man was not stupid. He was using quite sophisticated methods of psychological warfare to assimilate another kingdom. Not only was heroic, but very politically astute. And I say you would have to have been the first one to unify much of Wales. It's not exactly an easy terrain to rule over. However, he did die in battle. That's another reason why he's a hero. His son Angharad avenged and defeated the Mercians at Aberconwy, the estuary of the River Conwy, and that was remembered, that battle, as Diawl Duw am Rhodri, the revenge of God for Rhodri, for having killed him a year earlier and then avenged his death. Irin Rhaged. We're not quite sure about his name, and we're not quite sure about when he reigned, in the mid-6th century, mid-late 6th century. Irin Rhaged. Now, this one is important because we need to remember that Wales, its inheritance, is not limited to Wales. He was King of Rhaged. And we tend to approximate that with Cumbria, but it's more probably that this was around the entire estuary or the firth there. including much of the Dumfries area, Cumbria, and maybe further Galloway as well. And during his reign, it appears to have expanded and had vassal kingdoms of the other British kingdoms. For instance, the one probably towards Leeds, the one up around Cara Edin or Edinburgh, Godolphin, and maybe what would become Strathclyde later. And he appears to have become a warlord over these and then led them, pushing the Angles out and to the island of Medcloud or Lindisfarne. He won several key battles along the mountain ridge, dividing the Angles and the Britons. His legends are legends kept in the poetry of Taliesin. There's not much certain about this man. We do know that he had a son, Owain, who led this kingdom as well. And his legacy is that there was a brief moment in which the Britons really almost did push the Angle influence out of North England entirely. It was very, very close. Tewdrig ap Llwyach, or Tewdrig Sant, because he was a saint, or he is still a saint. He died around the year 600. We're not sure of when he reigned. It was a long time ago, and I chose Tewdrig ap Llwyach for a couple reasons. Firstly, Wales is a land of saints, and some of them have been kings, and that's quite notable. And so this man started Tewdrig, and that's the Welsh version of the name Theodoric, or Theodore Tewdrig. This man lived towards the end of the 6th century, or somewhere around there. And he had won several battles against the Saxons because his father, before him, had lost, and he regained a lot of that territory along the River Severn and in present-day Gloucestershire, but he ruled Gwent in the southeast. And after these victories, he was tired and he was getting old and he wanted to get some peace, and he decided to give his son Merig the kingdom. And he retired to Tyndirin, which would later have a firm, more grand ecclesiastical institution built upon it. But even in that day, hundreds of years before the abbey was built there, it was already noted for a religious presence, and he retired there. But the Saxons came back, and his son came back to him and his people, saying, "Take back your mantle and your crown, lead us to victory again." And a prophecy was given to him. And it said, "You can lead your people to victory in battle if you go back, but you will suffer a mortal wound." And so he went. He chose to go fight, knowing that his death was approaching, and his people won a great victory over the Saxon that preserved Avon Gwy in that area as being Welsh for many centuries. But then 2 stags came with an ox cart, like male deer, and took him towards Morhavren. They were going to take him to Ynys Echni, an island out in the Severn Sea, the estuary of the River Severn. But they stopped near a place where water burst out of the ground, and it became known as Ffynon Tewdrig, the Well of Tewdrig. Where Tewdrig died, his son Merig had a church built, and it became known as Merthyr Tewdrig, the Martyr Tewdrig. And over time, it became compressed into Mathern, meaning the place of the king, Mathern. And so, there's a lot of stories in Wales like this, and I wanted to include one of them in relation to a king. The other thing that's important is this man ruled in the southeast, and I wanted to give you a king from the southeast. A quick and fascinating note you need to take note of in this video before going forward. Tywysog, prince. Brenin, king. Tywys means to lead. Tywysog, one who leads. In the Welsh psychology and culture, these two were not below one another in power. That king was above prince was an imposition from English culture. In Welsh culture, these had subtly different meanings, and I'm going to explain that subtle difference to you now. Tywysog, prince, suggests the ruler of a country who's young, full of vitality, going to the borders and frontiers of the kingdom to fight. Brenin meant an older ruler, more established, the constructor of ecclesiastical institutions, the setting down of traditions and laws. These two were both rulers of a land, and they were not below or above one another necessarily in the Welsh context. So now you know I can talk about a prince. If you are liking this video, hit the like button because you like it. Llywelyn mab Iorwerth, or Llywelyn the Great. He reigned quite a long time, beginning in around 1194-95 and assuming more fuller power in 1200. He reigned for 40 years. He was Prince of Wales. Llywelyn the Great is, well, Llywelyn the Great. A very, well, if you're thinking of a king ruling over a kingdom in kind of the classical chivalrous age kind of sense, this is the kind of man that comes to mind. Over the course of 40 years, he dominated Wales in a way that no king had for the entirety of at least the Norman period. He reformed architecture, incorporating much of the Norman style, but also taking what Arogwy Rhys did in the south and adapting it. Llywelyn the Great reached in his military prowess down into the Welsh valleys, destroying Castell Caerphilly, the castle there, and attacking Pembrokeshire. He was an active player on a very wide stage. He was making statements in his constructions, building estates, hunting parks, reforming the laws so that it wasn't so complicated, because Hywel's laws had been around as a set piece for 300 years by this point. So he gave it much needed reforms, and he began to consolidate a state. And the Welsh princes under him recognized his authority as the Prince of Wales. Through most of his reign, he united them in a confederation underneath him. He accomplished a lot in the internal administration of his kingdom, reforming how it was governed. And though there were a couple periods of warfare, there was a peace in the middle of his reign that is quite significant and allowed Gwynedd stability, which it had not had over the previous 200 years. Hywel ap Cadell, or Hywel the Good, reigned from 904 together with his brother Clodogh, and then from 920 until 949 or 950 he reigned on his own. Most of Wales was his. Hywel is who the laws of Wales came to be named after. It's difficult to overstate how much of a rarity the peace during Hywel's reign was. In terms of codifying laws, people knew what to expect in legal matters and codifying relations with foreign powers in the early and middle 10th century. And it's important we understand the wider stage on these islands in his context as to the main reason why we should remember him, not just the laws that he codified and set down, which are wholly entirely important. He had a lasting peace during his reign, and he absorbed kingdoms through marriage and tact, more so than war. And on the wider stage, as I just mentioned, there were significant happenings going on. In England, the Kingdom of Wessex extinguished our brothers and sisters' self-government in Cornwall, and Cornwall has never risen up truly as an independent entity since. So Cornwall was lost during his reign, and the northern kingdom of Northumbria was absorbed into the Kingdom of England as well during his reign. So he looked afield and saw these two kingdoms being snuffed out, and he was very aware that he could be wiped out. Wales could be wiped out because Wessex was the most aggressive power that existed on these islands. And so when the rest of these islands kingdoms gathered together to fight Wessex, he stepped back. And that neutrality of stepping back, being in the shadow of your enemy, allowing him to fight enemies but not joining against him directly, that is a trait which has a residual echo in Wales ever since, because we survived where Cornwall did not, which was mainly a defensive tactic, and Strathclyde did not, which was mainly an aggressive tactic. So Wales looked at those two and said, so that defensive strategy failed, and so did the defensive strategy in the north. So Wales took a very balanced middle road. King Hywel was the master of this, and he was mocked in political satire for this. There's a poem, armes Prydain, mocking him, insulting him for not joining with the enemies of King Alfred the Great in battle to defeat them and drive the English from these islands, because many people thought he had missed our opportunity to finally wipe them out. There doesn't appear to be many Viking raids at all in his reigns. We're not sure, but there's an absence of evidence that there were, and the absence of violence from the side of Wessex with which he was friendly. This man brought true peace, and that makes him a good king. Gruffydd ap Llywelyn, King of Wales, began as King of Gwynedd in 1039, but by 1055 he had essentially killed all of his rivals and taken their lands, and he reigned as king for 7 years until 1063. He came in the generations after Hywel, when one of the weaknesses of Hywel was that he did not get rid of this clause in Welsh law that stated when a king dies, all of his sons, bastard or otherwise, inherit his kingdom in equal portions, which led the Welsh to a series of civil wars over and over again, like the amount of internal house feuds that happened in Welsh history is relentless. And so this man came to the stage in the middle of the 11th century, when Wales had suffered internal warfare, constant civil war, for almost 100 years. And so he had this to say. We have a quote by him. "Don't talk to me of killing. I am plucking out the thorns of Wales, which would kill its mother." So his mission was quite clear. He literally went around killing everyone in his path who he felt would not help unify Wales into a single kingdom. Well, if you're going to fight each other, I'll kill all of you to unite the country. And that's what it took, because he is the only king in all of history, the only Welshman, to have unified Wales as a singular king, ruling over all of it and recognized as such. Wales is not a small country, it's deceptively large because of its compressed geography, and to conquer that physically took serious bloodshed. And this man attacked England. Gruffydd ap Llywelyn amassed a fleet of ships and then sailed up the river Severn, Havren in Welsh, and burned English settlements to the ground. I don't think any Welsh ruler had done that using rivers and fleets before nor after him to any such extent. He wanted to reconquer Britain. And that little bit here, look at the map, that little peninsula above Wrexham of Wales, that was land that he took back, that had been in English control for a couple, 200 or 300 years, and he took it back. And that's why I call him the Angry King. But to impose unity and to save his country after so long of civil wars required it. Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, Llywelyn and Llyw Olaf, Llywelyn our last leader, Llywelyn the last. He's of the same lineage or same family as Llywelyn the Great, and that's a long dynasty in itself. He came to power in 1246 and reigned all the way to 1282 when he was killed by the English invaders. And his reign is quite significant. He was Prince of Wales, and let's talk about him. Llywelyn ap Gruffydd. We tend to remember this man, Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, as Llywelyn the Last, and Llyw Olaf, our last leader. He was the last recognized Prince of Wales who was Welsh. But I think there's a much more important reason why we should remember this man. And I think it's overshadowed. I think his actual character is overshadowed. Because the reason that war happened was because his brother David led a rebellion in lands that England had taken not long prior, and the Welsh retook that land. And the King of England, the tyrant, King Edward I, wrote him and said, basically, give your brother over to me and we'll avoid this war. And Llywelyn wrote back basically saying, I will not betray my brother even if it means the destruction of my kingdom. He loved his brother. He would not just give up his brother even to save the world. And it literally was the end of the world as far as the Welsh were concerned. There's a poem by Gruffydd ap Rhynard Goch, which is a eulogy, and you need to read it and understand it to fully grasp what the death of this man was to Welsh history in the long run of things. And so that conquest of Wales by Edward I was a direct result of Llywelyn's fraternal love. He would not betray David. Instead, he picked up arms and said to his country, we are fighting to the death. That's significant. It's not the story that the Welsh are divided and always fight amongst each other. That was an effect of the laws, the legal system. But the character, the Welsh character, actually shows through in this king. Rhys ap Gruffydd, or Arglwydd Rhys, the Lord Rhys. He was king of Deheubarth, the southern realm, in the generation after the Normans had come in. He reigned a long time, from 1155 to 1197, and that's important for what he did as a modernizing king. Rhys found his kingdom flanked on multiple sides by Norman French, And it's here in his kingdom in the south that Wales in the 12th century, the mid-12th century, is undergoing the most rapid change culturally that it had ever done so since Rome. And he decided to take that and fuse it with his own ideas and Welshness to strengthen his country, rather than to fear it. He did not fear change. And French is being absorbed more into the Welsh language in this period. The weapons change. The art of whisk, the armor, the art of whisk becomes more flexible, more layered. It's a French influence. The clothing changes, becomes richer in fabrics. The color blue, indigo blue, royal blue, is in vogue. And he is the one that really began to, when he took Norman castles, he updated them and wove Welsh architecture into castles and really began building stone Welsh castles before it had been wood. He was the one who really set that in motion. The kings up north did after him, but it was he who set that in motion, who was the first who dared to be that different by absorbing French styles of architecture. The word tour for tower comes into Welsh during his lifetime. He sets up cultural festivals, a Steddfod. I like that he's from the south and that, because the south of Wales has traditionally been more open, that he called himself Lord and Justiciar of South Wales, which more or less meant Prince of South Wales. He was experimenting with the titles of the Norman nobility to intermingle with them and to secure the safety of his kingdom from their attack. He was willing to change to prevent being assimilated out. Emrys Iledig, or in Latin, Ambrosius Aurelianus. And that's important that it is in Latin, because this was a genuine Romano-Briton, and he reigned, we're not sure exactly, probably the middle of the 5th century, and we're not entirely sure where he reigned exactly. My guess is near the River Severn, maybe. Why should we remember this man when we remember so little about him? We know almost nothing about this man. Emrys Iledig wore, according to legend, the imperial Roman purple, or that his family did, suggesting that he had come from the nobility that had emerged, from the British chieftains that had more or less compromised with Rome over centuries to keep their power, and the Roman elite that had come in and married intermingling with them. And so he is that inheritance, and that's a really key point of Welsh identity and how it formed. And that's probably what's most important about him, is that this was a Romano-Briton who led armies and pushed the Saxons back after the initial waves and secured a frontier where Welsh culture could emerge. We have scant information, but that name, Wledig, means landed. Glad is the word for country, and it's a title. Up in the north of southern Scotland, it was Gladog, and Gledig for the south. And it meant someone who rules lands, someone landed, someone of the upper class. And he's connected to King Arthur in a lot of folk tales, and that's very important because it's a memory, it's a folk memory of where the Welsh come from. We need to remember there is a native British element in Welsh identity, and that fusion of Roman Empire with the Brythonic culture is what gave birth to the Welsh language itself. I would say in the everyday vocabulary, Welsh is far more Latin-based than English. Welsh is a Romano-British language. And so I chose Emrys Wledig to remind us that that's where we come from, and we need to remember that. Gruffydd ap Cynon was king of Gwynedd, and he was king of Gwynedd more than once, and he lost it more than once. 1075, 1081, getting it back in 1094 and 95, and losing it, and again 1101, reigning all the way to 1137. So the last reign of Gwynedd was quite long and a genuinely stabilizing force. It would make an epic film, the story of his life. He is from Viking and Welsh Royal lineage, and he lost his kingdom 3 times and regained it 3 times. He was imprisoned in Chester, and he organized resistance on multiple occasions, taking it back, losing it, gathering up troops, guerrilla attacks, fleeing to Ireland, hiring mercenaries, having mercenaries betray him, finding other people to kill off the mercenaries, and then find other people that had hidden in Wales to gather them and then retake his kingdom again and again and again. And he brought folk musicians, we think, from Ireland, which spawned a whole new tradition of music in Wales. What I think we should remember about this man is that the sheer tenacity, the will to not give up your kingdom, to not let it fall, to take it back by any means necessary. That's what his life was, taking back Wales by any means necessary. Owain ap Gruffydd, the son of Gruffydd ap Cynon, also called Owain Gwynedd, sometimes referred to in his life as Owain Mawr, Owain the Great, not generally used much after though. And he was the first one to style himself as prince. Owain's reign lasted quite a while, from 1137 all the way to 1170. Owain Gwynedd was a king of princes because more than once he led a confederation of princes as kind of a figurehead, and he won battles when he was outnumbered by thousands, almost killing the King of England. And he never lost a battle outright in his entire life. He fought multiple duels to the death, one-on-one, and he lived. By the end of his life, he had doubled the size of his kingdom, and then had years of peace. But this idea that he was a tywysog, not a brenin, a king, but a prince, this was when he was early on leading these princes, and he wanted to inspire young men to fight for their country. So he came down to them and said, I'm youthful, I'm young, I'm leading these battles because I'm a prince. Because remember, in the Welsh tradition, the princes were the ones leading in battle, not necessarily a king. It was a different concept than in English, and it was a powerful statement. And his legacy is that he left that statement, that idea of the youthful king calling himself a prince, onto the Welsh psychological stage for the next couple centuries. He also has quite a significant amount of poetry written for him. Several great victories over the English happened in his lifetime, which was able to give Wales a bit of breathing room to further develop its culture. Madog ap Gruffydd Maelor. He ruled the northern bits of Powys Vadog. In 1191, he reigned with a brother. He had a few, but from 1197 until 1236, he reigned as a sole king of his territory. Madog had to bounce back and forth between King John and Llywelyn the Great more than once, though he went back to Llywelyn the Great in the end. But he did so because he was astute. He was playing real politik. He wasn't messing around with what he wanted to do. He did what he had to do to ensure that he and his small kingdom survived. And that, I think, is why he turned to ecclesiastical land and property to accrue power. I like that about this man. He wasn't in it for some sacrosanct piety. He was in it to play the game with people bigger than himself, and he was trying to win. And Madog built Abertigal and Groes near Llangollen, in an area which centuries before, during the time of Roger the Great and before then even, had erected the Pillar of Elisedd, which commemorated pushing the English out of Powys. And so Madog ap Gruffydd was getting in touch with an ancient tradition of ecclesiastical symbols in that area above Llangollen, and putting his Cadarnle, his stronghold, his strong place, in the southern bits of the Berwyn around Castell Dinas Fram. And that's important. He was trying to further establish the foundations of a kingdom. That he managed to succeed because he died peacefully after a long life, which was quite an achievement when you're trapped between Llywelyn the Great and King John, which was a megalomaniac in England. The fact that he did that is a testimony to his prudence and his ability. He was using real estate, he was using land to manipulate the church. I admire him for this, and it's important, I think. They were using capitalistic means of resistance, even in the 12th and 13th centuries. They were using the market and property to wage war against the English. And a lot of us today seem to think, on the Welsh side, that using finance and property is not a just or morally good thing to do. But these adamantly Christian kings did not think anything of it, did they? So why should we? Why should we not use property as a means of warfare when they did, and did so successfully? That was a quick overshot of 12 of the many kings and princes I could have chosen. There are a lot more, and I'll give you links below if I can find them to get you more info on that. Question of the day: which one of those did you like best? Which one do you think was the best king? For those of you who know a bit more about Wales, were there any that I did not include that you thought should have been in there, and why? Or if I make another video for all of you, which one do you think I should focus on? I could make an entire video about any of those kings. Which one interests you? Hey, as always, diolch yn fawr am wylio. Thank you very much for watching. We'll see you in the next episode.